Welcome back, everybody, and thanks for stopping by. I really have been receiving a lot of great support on this channel over the last month, and one of the most common comments that I've been receiving is questions about this here, the windscreen that's mounted to my DR650. Now, we talked a little bit about Carl's in a previous video, but I still keep getting questions about what's this, what kind of windscreen is it, how is it mounted on there. So I thought it would be a really great idea to just make a quick video about what this windscreen actually is, who makes it, and how I've mounted it to this DR650. So why don't you sit back, grab yourself a nice drink, enjoy the ride today on Dino's Tinker Shed. Now, this windshield came with the bike when I bought it used, but it came with no mounting hardware at all. It was basically, I just tucked it up in the corner and didn't really think much of it. I actually thought I might buy a new windshield for it, something that had hardware. But the more I looked at it, the more I liked the appearance of it and the way that it fit the bike itself. It would provide good protection for where I wanted to mount my GPS, and I really thought it would be a great thing to play with. So I built some mounting brackets for the actual windscreen, and you can see those here in these photos. And Carl actually pointed out to me it's a BMW windscreen. I believe it's a BMW f650gs Dakar windscreen. So to get a better look at how I've mounted it, I think the easiest thing to do here is actually take it off of the bike. I mounted it to the small white plastic fairing that you see here. That's the only thing that holds it on, are those 3 mounting posts that I made and the 3 screws that hold the small fairing in place itself. And you'll see here it just comes off on its own, and we'll put it up on the bench once I get it off. Okay, now that it's on the bench, you can see how I've mounted the 3 existing holes in the windscreen to the actual white fairing. And all I did was I used some regular fender washers here. And on the other side, the one piece that did come with it were these washers that have little rubber O-rings mounted to them. I'm sure you could make these if you had to. And what I did is I took some 1/2-inch square stock and some 5/16 bolts, or sorry, 3/16 bolts. And I basically pressed the nut down into the actual piece of tubing. So I cut them off. The smallest one is, I think, around 40 millimeters, about 1.5 inches, and the longer 2 pieces were about 65 millimeters, or about 2 1/4 inches. So once I get my press set, I'm just going to actually press that nut into the tube itself. Now, I did have to grind the shoulders off the nut a little bit to get this to press in. But eventually, you can use a vise for this, but I just happen to have a small 12-ton press. And you can see it's a nice clean fit. Now I thread a 3/16 bolt in there to protect the threads of the nut when I weld it. So I just sort of clamp it in the vise like this. And then I put a couple tacks. Now, I am no professional welder by any means, and I have the absolute cheapest welder I could find when I bought it 15 years ago. It's just a little flux core, but it's enough that I can tinker in the shop and make little parts like this. You can see here, I am not a great welder. And the next shot it really demonstrates that. There's more grapes on this than there is in a vineyard down in Niagara on the lake. But you know what? It works, and it was solid enough once I was done. And overall, what I was aiming for here was to make sure that that bolt is as parallel to the tubes as possible. And I welded a nut on either end of these offset pieces to create that offset itself. And a grinder and some paint really makes up for bad welding. I've been told that in the past. There's a few people out there that say it. And I know my brother-in-law is probably watching. He's a professional welder. He's probably shaking his head right now. But you know what? This isn't structural. It's really just to hold that windshield in place, and it worked okay. And here you can kind of see how this works. Is I have one smaller offset at the front and then the two longer offsets at the back. And what I did is I threaded them into the windshield first and then located on the plastic where to drill the holes into the small white plastic fairing. And in the end, I ended up putting a bridge across the top pieces here that I welded in place and then painted it all up. And what that did is it added a little bit more rigidity to the windscreen, and it also gave me a place to mount my GPS mount. So that was just a basic Garmin Nuvi mount that fits on the bike like that, but it tucks in behind the windscreen relatively well. It's a bit of a bonus. Here's this little dash that I made to hold my 12-volt system. It's held up by a ram mount. And there was actually a ball mount mounted to the light frame. You can see it here, and they used a plastic spoon as a spacer. I'm never taking this out, it's too cool. Alright, I'll put the fairing back on here, and it goes on just with those 3 mounting bolts that we took off at the beginning. I like to put the one under the headlight in first, and I just lightly snug that down, not very tight, and that allows the fairing to move and also allows you to line up the other 2 bolts. So the one on the right hand side I'll put in and leave loose, and once I get that done I'll put in the one on the left hand side, on the clutch side of the bike. And once I get this one in, I'll actually snug this one down. So I always like to push in when I snug this just so I don't strip out the Phillips head bolts, and then I'll come back and retighten the bolts that were just loose. So the one under the headlight and then the one over here on the right hand side. And believe it or not, that's all that holds this fairing on. And I'll just reroute the GPS cable in there, the USB cable, and snap my GPS on. And I always like to test it just to make sure that nothing came loose. And the job's done. Ready to ride. So out on the road, the windscreen really doesn't vibrate all that much. Even at highway speeds, it's fairly stable. Now, I would say that there's probably better methods to mount this than what I've done. Mounting it to the plastic fairing here probably isn't the strongest method, but again, you can take it and run with it if you like the look of it. And overall, I really do. I think it fits the lines of the bike well. It gives lots of clearance for the lights. And on the highway, it provides really good wind protection for my needs. Some people may want a little bit bigger windscreen like what Carl has with his Spitfire. But for me, it keeps enough wind off my chest but still allows enough on my face that when I flip my visor open, I get a really nice cooling breeze through there. So that's my windscreen. I thank whoever bought it because I, again, got it with the bike. I just built the brackets to mount it onto the fairing. And I would say get out in your shed and have some fun out there and try doing something like this. So until next time, I'm Dino. Enjoy your day, and we'll see you again soon on Dino's Tinker Shed.